Welcome to The Curious Photographer. My name is Mike Byrne, and today I'm going to talk about subject matter, or more specifically, my favorite subject matter, bears. Of all the wildlife I've photographed, I find that photographing bears can be the most rewarding and often the most fun. Bears are expressive and full of character. They can be curious, loving, playful, and thoughtful. Of course, they can also be aggressive, intense, and they are fierce predators. Here in North America, we are lucky that we have a relatively strong population of bears. In British Columbia alone, we have about 120,000 black bears and maybe 15,000 grizzlies. Just north of us in Alaska, that's home to probably 30,000 brown bears. And Canada's Arctic is ranged for roughly 15,000 polar bears. That may sound like a lot of bears, but in truth, this territory is huge, and most of the land is rugged, and it can be really hard to find a safe place to photograph bears, especially if you try to do it on your own. That brings me to bear photography, ironclad rule number 1. Always, always hire a local guide who is experienced with the local bears and who follows a well thought out plan on managing the interactions between bears and humans. I can't emphasize this point enough. You have to work with a local guide who knows the bears. He'll know which bears are curious, which ones are aggressive. He'll also know which bears are more relaxed around humans. And he'll take you to the right spaces so you can get the best pictures. A local guide will keep you safe, and to me, every bit as important, he'll also keep the bear safe. By the way, I've been photographing bears almost all of my life, but that doesn't make me a bear guide. I'm a photographer who works with local guides. Of course, there are lots of obvious guidelines or rules for working around bears. Things like don't feed the bears, never get between a mother and her cubs, don't startle bears. Those things are obvious and you absolutely have to follow those rules. But local guides will know some of the more subtle differences about how bears have interacted with humans in their area. And those subtle differences vary from place to place. So that's why local guides can help you. Some places the guides will ask you to always give way to the bear, to move out of their way, never block their paths. Other places, especially in more open territory, will say, as a group, we want to convince the bear to go around. So you listen to the guide and do what they say. And that's ironclad rule number 2. Once you've gone to the expense of hiring an experienced local guide, listen to him or her. Whatever they say, don't think about it, just obey. You can always question later, but in terms of safety, bears are fierce predators, and you have to respect them and be aware it's their territory that you're invading. So listen to your guides, do what they tell you to, talk about it over a beer later. One of my favorite locations in Alaska is Lake Clark National Park. There are several lodges along the beach that provide excellent guides who can take you to the best locations and keep you safe. And to be honest, there is just about nothing that can compete with the massive thrill of watching 800 to 900 pound brown bears chase salmon through the tidal flats and up the stream. To be honest, sitting on the sandbars with a big lens, following and panning with these bears as they sprint and splash and ultimately consume salmon is one of the biggest thrills you can ever have in wildlife photography. I remember one day up at Lake Clark where I spent probably 10 hours camped out on the sandbars with a big lens and a tripod. And in those 10 hours, I probably saw 8 or 10 different bears coming to the water to chase fish. I had a mom and cub that played for a little while. You had a younger bear show up and the older one chased him off. And all of this is, it's really an experience that everybody should have because it's It's photography at its finest, where you can see bears being loving, bears being aggressive, bears running. I mean, it's pretty fun to capture a 900-pound bear in the air, full out, stretched out above the spray of the water, and to watch the salmon try to get away. But Lake Clark offers even more than that. There's lots of really beautiful, lush green meadows. And when the bears get into the meadows, sometimes they're just grazing on the grass. Sometimes they'll stop to feed their cubs. But the contrast is to die for. So you get these beautiful big brown bears and this nice yellowy green grass with maybe some mountains in the background. These are settings that are absolutely to die for. One of the challenges at working at Lake Clark, though, is the weather. This is Alaska, and it may be August, maybe even September, but a lot of the days are cool, sitting maybe only 5, 10, 15 degrees above freezing at best, and often you get overcast and drizzle. So you need good rain gear, you need probably some good rubber boots, maybe even insulated rubber boots. And on top of that, you're talking about carrying a big lens, a tripod, and all the rest of your camera gear. So that is a challenge. Let's talk about camera equipment needed for bear photography. At some locations, you'll be surprised how close you may come to the bears. But generally speaking, the goal is to keep a healthy distance away from them. This means you're going to need a long lens. And there are numerous choices, and there are no really perfect choices. Most people are going to go for the sort of lens that falls into that 150 to 600 mil range. There are lots of these kinds of lenses out there made by many different manufacturers. This one is a 2 to 600, Nikon makes a 2 to 500, Olympus has a 150 to 400, which doubled is actually a 300 to 800. So there's lots of these lenses, and they are relatively affordable. Many of these come in somewhere at around $2,000, which is expensive, but it won't break the bank. The problem with these lenses is they're kind of slow. Most of them have maximum apertures of 5.6 or 6.3 when you've zoomed out to 600 millimeters. And that's a problem because bears love to hang out in shady streams, they're deep in valleys, and it's dark in there. And so you suddenly find that in order to get the shutter speed high enough that you can get a bear jumping into a stream, you're going to need a shutter speed of 800th of a second, 1,000th of a second, somewhere in that range, and suddenly your ISO is out of this world, up at 12,000, 25,000 ISO. And that's a real problem. So one of the solutions is to go big. So this is a 600 mil f4 lens. That means you're buying twice as much light. If I had trouble shooting with the smaller lens, at 1,000th of a second, this lens gives me twice as much light, means I have that much better chance to get to that 1,000th of a second. But these things are heavy. They're big, they're clunky, and they're stupidly expensive. Think about it. Hauling this onto small planes and boats is a real problem. But even worse, this land is rugged, and if you want to carry a lens this expensive across slippery rocks that are barnacle encrusted, covered with seaweed, or if you want to try to haul them up slippery slopes because these valleys are steep, well, that's a commitment, and it's not easy and it's not fun. So these will buy you more light, but they buy you a host of other issues as well. It might be the better answer is looking at your camera. Finding a camera that's really good in low light will make a big difference, and it's a much cheaper investment. In general, new cameras are a lot better in low light than older cameras. So rather than spending thousands of dollars to upgrade your lens, you might want to consider buying a new camera. With cameras, generally speaking, the more megapixels on the sensor, the less sensitive it is in low light, or the lower the quality of image at high ISOs. So think about that. The 60 megapixel monster camera is not necessarily your best bet for low light. Some of the cameras with more, say, 20 or 24 megapixels might be a better answer, particularly in the full frame world where the pixels look bigger and have better light gathering capabilities. Another of my favorite places to photograph bears is the Great Bear Rainforest on British Columbia's west coast. There are many ways to access this area, but the truth is it's a very inaccessible place. You can fly into Prince George, into Bella Bella, or to Bella Coola, and all of those areas sort of get you in the general vicinity. But from there, you can generally assume you're going to be traveling by four-wheel drive, or by boat, or by small plane, to get into the fjords that really cut deeply into the coastline. And it's in these fjords that you can have amazing bear photography opportunities. The Great Bear Rainforest is home to thousands of grizzlies and black bears, but is also home to one of the rarest bears you can find anywhere in the world, and that's called a spirit bear. A spirit bear is a subspecies of a black bear, and it depends who you listen to, but in reality, there's probably less than 100 spirit bears to be found in the world, and every one of those is going to be found in the Great Bear Rainforest, primarily on 3 islands: Gribble Island, Roderick Island, and Princess Royal Island. These places are rugged, hard to get to, and you do need special permission from the local tribes before you can go there. One of the easiest ways to access the Great Bear Rainforest is by hiring any of the numerous companies that take tours from Vancouver Island across to the mainland and into these fjords. They'll take you into Toba Inlet, Knight Inlet, and Butte Inlet. And all of these places offer excellent tour companies with experienced guides and great bear photography opportunities. For those who want to commit to a longer bear photography trip, I can strongly recommend places like Tweedsmuir Provincial Park or going to Spirit Bear Lodge at Klemtu. These offer some great places to stay, and they immerse you right into the environment where the bears live. They'll give you opportunities of photographs of bears chasing fish in the streams. They'll give you some nice, luscious landscapes with bears in meadows or along riverbeds. It's really to die for terrain. My last stop in my bear photography season is Vancouver Island. Vancouver Island is home, believe it or not, to probably about 10,000 black bears. There's no resident grizzly bears here, and there's certainly no spirit bears, but there are tons of black bears and lots of great opportunities, particularly on the west coast, to take their pictures. This season will extend from September through October, all the way to the end of October, and once in a while, even into the first week or so of November. And here, especially in the salmon-bearing creeks, you'll find them fishing or wandering up and down the coastlines. But again, the territory is rugged, and local guides will know how to get you to where you need to be. I often get asked about, with all my bear photography, if I've ever had any of these sort of close or dangerous encounters. And the truth is, no, not really. Although there have been a few interesting moments. A friend of mine and I were up in a place called Zabalos, which is up on the northwest coast of Vancouver Island. And we'd been photographing a black bear as he worked his way down the river. And in an effort to get ahead, so we were hoping we'd get ahead of him and get him coming into our frame, we jumped in our vehicle and drove for about half a mile or so and found a place to pull over by the side of the river. And I jumped out of the car because I wanted to, there was just a little opening there and I wanted to look upriver to see if the bear was coming. So I probably wasn't being as careful as I should have been, and I went to this little opening in the trees and stuck my head out, and right below me was a mother black bear with a cub. And I saw her and kind of gave a squeak, and she saw me and kind of gave a squeak, and I went back to my vehicle and she took off in the other direction. But it was just one of those moments that kind of illustrate you do need to be careful all the time in bear territory. If I'd been smart, if I'd been aware that there was a bear there, it would have been different. But this is bear territory and she would belong there, and I should have been paying attention and clearing the area before I stuck my head out to look up the river. Happily, nothing bad came of it, and that's really as close as I've ever come. But the experiences with bears can be amazing. Up at Lake Clark, I was with a group of, I think, 6 or 8 people, and we were on the beach watching this big female brown bear come towards us. And as she got closer, you could see members of the group were starting to get a little concerned because it looked like she was, well, coming straight at us. And we didn't really have anywhere for cover. We didn't have a vehicle with us. There's no huts to climb into. We're very exposed out on a beach. But remember I said earlier, the guides here are really good. And our guide just said, okay, guys, everyone stay close. Don't do anything loud. Don't make any sudden movements. We don't want to startle the bear. But just stay as a big group, and we're bigger than her than she is. And he went kind of the front of our group, and as she approached, by now she was probably within 25 feet maybe, he just started talking to her really quietly, and it was just, go around, bear, go around. And she looked at us, and you could see she's kind of looking at us at the corner of her eye, just kind of, seriously? She got a little closer, she's probably within 15 feet, and he's still talking to her, go around, bear, just go around. And you could just see her almost shaking her head and say, okay. And she just carefully walked around us, came back to the water's edge, and continued on beyond us. At one point, she was probably easily within 10 feet of us. But it was never a threat, because we were a well-managed group. The guide knew what he was doing, and he knew the bear, too. He knew she wasn't a problem. She'd been working with photographers her whole life, too. As a cub, she grew up in that area. So she knew what it was about, and he knew her. And it made for a safe and absolutely kind of a really remarkable, exhilarating experience. One of the greatest thrills of photographing bears is the simple fact that bears are great posers. They're like runway models that don't need any direction. I remember one time up at Lake Clark, we came across this big brown bear kind of snoozing on a log, and at first we were taking pictures from a really comfortable distance, 100 feet or so, and he wasn't fussed at all, so we got a little bit closer, and he changed pose for us, and he held that pose for about 2 minutes, and then he changed again, and we got even closer. And we ended up photographing this guy for about 20 minutes, and about every 2 to 3 minutes he would change poses, and I swear he just said, do you like this angle? How about this one? How about this? And it was just amazing to get this massive, big brown bear that he could take you out with a swipe if he cared to, but he didn't. Instead, he was posing for us. And I've seen this behavior in lots of places. At Thornton Creek, we had a black bear, older black bear, climb up into kind of the ruins of a tree. And he posed this way, and then he looks up this way, and and you can sit back comfortably with your 600mm lens and get some really amazing photographs. Another of my favorite locations on Vancouver Island is a place called Thornton Creek Fish Hatchery. This is a place where the black bears come pretty much consistently in late September and through most of October. The fish pool in the little creek there. There's a little boardwalk that you can follow, so it's a great place to photograph bears. One day I was working my way up the boardwalk, and it leads to a small waterfall, which is where the fish hatchery dips out and pulls out its salmon for the hatchery. As I went across, I realized there was a black bear on the other side of the creek, almost paralleling over the rocks. And every once in a while, he'd look in, kind of like a dog checks in. He's like, you paying attention to me? I'm following you. So I stopped, and he stopped. I looked at him for a minute or two, and he just kind of stood there looking at me. And so I set up my camera and started to get a couple pictures of him. And then he rested his paws on this log, and then he rested his head on his paws. And we sat there for, I would say, at least 5 minutes, maybe 10, just kind of soaking in each other. And then, eventually he kind of looked at me and said, okay, got your pictures? And he wandered off, and I packed up my camera and went back down the other end of the stream. But that was another one of these sort of wonderful pictures of bears, or wonderful experiences with bears. They're curious. They're interested in us. And if I could say one thing about bear photography, is going into areas where the bear interactions are well managed is really the thing to do. If you're into high tourist areas, it's very hard to know what experiences that bear has had with humans. That bear may have been sprayed, there may have been bear bangers used on it, people have been yelling at it, screaming at it, people may have been trying to feed it. These are all really bad things to have happen to bears, and it gets the bears in troubles, and ultimately, usually, you end up having to call the Fish and Game or the wildlife officer and the bear gets shot. We don't want that at all. So when I'm looking for bear photographs, I avoid the high tourist areas. Getting out to the remote locations. Now you're into areas where the bears and their interactions are well managed on a consistent basis. At Lake Clark, they've been following the same practices with their bears for many, many years. So the cubs grow up knowing kind of the ground rules of being around humans. And the humans know the exact same ground rules for being around the bears. Same sort of rules apply at Tweedsmuir Provincial Park and in the Great Bear Rainforest. These areas are remote, they're hard to access, but the beauty of it is the local guides are experienced and they follow the same plans day in, month in, year in, and that produces safe interactions and also often gets you far and away the best photographs. You can get amazingly close to these animals in a very safe way at times. As long as you remember, use that local experienced guide. This is not something you want to do on your own.